What up, witches, and welcome to Witchin and Bitchin, a podcast. I'm your host, Darren.
And I'm Vicky. How are you all today? Sorry, I can't stop saying it.
You haven't said that. I hope you're really, really well.
I didn't. I know. I didn't. Hope you're really well anyway.
Awesome. So as discussed previously in other episodes, we gave you a little bit of a sneak peek that we have a special guest coming on today. So it's no surprise that I'm a huge fan of our guest. So I'm going to give you a formal introduction first of all. So Christopher Penczak is the co-founder of the Temple of Witchcraft, a religious non-profit organization, and the creator of the Temple of Witchcraft Mystery School and Seminary education programs. Developed through his extensive work as an award-winning author, ritualist, and minister, the educational core of the program comes from his 6-book and CD set Temple of Witchcraft series. After many years independently teaching the program, he worked with the graduates to create a cooperative organization to expand and apply the teachings and serve the greater community with a wide range of ministries. With a current focus on expanding the culture of the witchcraft community, he co-founded Copper Cauldron, an independent publishing company, to support his own vision, and that continues to teach internationally. Right? I've skipped a line. I'm so sorry about that. Let me go back a sec. Copper Cauldron, an independent publishing company, to support his own vision and that of the Temple of Witchcraft community. Today, Christopher continues to teach internationally, write, see private clients, design jewelry, and travel to sacred sites with small groups. So for more information, you can visit www.christopherpenczak.com and templeofwitchcraft.org, but we'll pop all those links in our write-up. So please give a nice big warm welcome to Christopher Penczak.
Hi,
hello everybody.
So sorry about that and getting tongue-tied. Oh,
you did well. There's lots to say. It's good.
And it's like my husband laughs at me because my phone is on like the smallest font size.
I was going to say, make it bigger. So thank you so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's snowing here, but we're doing good.
Yeah, that's good. I know. I always do the royal we, the royal I. Sorry, I always do it.
It's very plural. It's a cooperative collective here.
That's it. We like to have everyone there.
I guess not to kind of touch on a bit of a damper move, just because we know here in Australia, obviously at the moment we're recording this during the pandemic.
Yes.
How has it been up in New England with the pandemic that's going on for everybody?
We're not the worst place, but we're not the best place. Cases are going up right now. I have been fairly quarantined since March 13th, which was my dad's birthday. That was the last time I actually did something social out in the world.
Wow.
Other than grocery shopping, and I've seen a couple of friends distantly, like outside, or had some, distant visits. But other than that, we've been kind of held up here. So on one level, I'm an introvert, so the reason is horrible, and I'm not diminishing that in any way, but to not have to go see people, it's a certain level of like, I'm okay with that, it's been a little tough to build community and to support people when not seeing them, but it's been sort of a blessing in disguise, because we've taken care of so many of our distant members who don't have community around them, because we've got the school and everything. So now our next stage will be when we can go back to normal, whatever that is. How do we still include people at a distance, and how do we have more online things so everybody can feel involved? So it's good in that sense, but it's been a weird time, like just to not, I traveled so much. I used to take a trip, maybe once or twice a month, every month. And I have not been on a plane for, over a year.
Yeah, I actually said that to Vicky. We recently did an episode on, we're doing 2020 reflections at the end of the year. And whilst a lot of people I speak to, they were saying how like shit 2020 is, and like, let's just be done with it. But I'm like, I don't know if they realize that you can't just go, oh, it's 2021, problem solved. But for us, we both had pretty good years, because we both utilized that time to do a lot of personal development, and we created this podcast, which has been a blessing for both of us, because now we're more in touch with our own spiritual paths. And like, obviously I took the time to apply for the mystery school, which I was thankful that I got in. So I'm like so super excited to start that with you soon, which is like, I mean, like I wanted to do the mystery school. I'm like, oh, I wonder who's going to be my teacher. And then when I saw that you're teaching the remote students, I'm like, oh my God, this is like perfect. All the stars have aligned. I have Christopher Penczak teaching me, in the apprenticeship in witchcraft. So it's like, it's so awesome. I'm so blessed and honored. But anyways, I won't take over. Hijack this discussion.
No, well, it's fine, because that's also a really good point. It's really kind of had to change the way we do things a lot as well. So like bringing more things out online and things like that. So like, have you found that yourself as well? Like bringing that more online?
Yeah, I find, well, you
Like the
know,
online format, I guess.
as I've mentioned, kind of being an introvert,
Mm.
I don't love, although I'm happy to be here tonight, I
Yes.
really love to be on video. I don't really love to, do
Yes.
all, I'm a very traditional teacher of mouth to ear and in person and
Yeah.
holding space and everything. And so it's weird to not do that.
Mm.
Yeah.
But it's also been good. It's been a great challenge to, how can I convey my message better? And
Mm.
how can I prepare lessons that are conducive to being online? It's interesting because like we're recording this on Zoom, and Zoom's not super great about music, even if you share the sound and so I do a lot of meditations. So not to be able to
Oh,
have that, I
yes.
have to find different ways to do meditations and learning to do online ritual, which I think I was always against before, and figuring out,
Yeah.
well, how do we do that where it actually works, and we do a lot of stuff through an astral temple, so that's been
Yeah.
helpful for some of our gatherings. But it's been weird and good and weird.
Yeah. It's got that kind of mix of both, doesn't it? It's a
I
bit-
almost feel as though like now witchcraft, I know we've kind of gone off on a tangent already, but I kind
Yeah.
of feel as though witchcraft has evolved naturally because of this whole crisis, that now we've almost given, like, where we had, a god of fertility and a god or goddess of,
Mm.
the pastures or whatever. Like now we've literally almost got like an internet communication god and a social distancing god. Like we've almost given these things a thought form of entity on their own, that
Yeah.
we've now had to kind of appease these new gods that have been created as a result of, like, come on, communication god, be on my side here. I know it's Mercury retrograde, but I need this
Yeah.
Zoom to work. You know what I mean? So it's always funny that it's a little bit comical, but like it's interesting to see how we've all evolved as a society.
And I actually think there's a lot of metaphysical truth to that, in the sense that
Mm.
a lot of older gods will take on new attributes. Like we think of a god of technology or information, but for me, that's the Hermes Mercury
Yeah.
figure. That's
Yeah.
that type of energy to it. Or when I think of just like the internet, I think of the Weaver.
Yeah.
And even though the Weaver
Mm.
is that much more, and fate and everything, there's also that interconnection through threads, which is literally what we're doing.
All the yeah,
So
that's it. That's
yeah.
amazing. I wanted to also just bring it back a little bit
Sorry.
from no. I loved it. That was a great tangent. we do. We like to go on tangents. That's kind of our thing. So just let us know if we end up going too far. But I wanted to bring it back to a question we often ask all of our guests that we have come on, because it's something that we wanted to really share with our podcast, that there is so many different ways of being a modern witch. And we just wanted to know how would you define a modern witch? And it's just your personal sort of description, I guess. I know it's a huge question.
It's a huge question, but it's also an easy question. I would say a
Yeah.
modern is a modern person practicing the arts and sciences and religion of witchcraft.
Yeah.
For me, although I do definitely identify as a modern witch, I do identify as a modern person. And I think it's counterproductive to think of yourselves as living 2,000 years ago, because that's not where we're living.
Yeah.
We find our inspiration there, but that's not where we're living. I'm
Yeah.
also a big believer in the perennial tradition. So I think that there's a great chain of wisdom. And so I look at being a modern witch as just one more link in that chain of perennial wisdom that connects us back to the ancestors.
Yeah.
And then someone's asked me recently, like, well, what do we actually do that is ancient? Like, if you really look at a lot of these texts, how far does anything go back? Does it go back Madame Blavatsky or the spiritualist or whatever? But
Yeah.
I think the core of what we do is ancient, because it's the inherent things to humanness. I think we may have different ways of entering trance, but we all enter trance, and that's the same type of experience, no matter when it was, whether it was 5,000 years ago, whether it was last week. The experience of the gods, the experience of the moon, the experience of standing in circle, the experience of dancing at night, the experience of holding something and imbuing it with intention, I think is so ancient. We might have modern ways of how we describe it, and we might give it a context to make it make sense to us as modern people. But I think it's really bringing the ancient traditions forward to the modern era, is I guess what I think.
That's so beautiful. And I
Yeah, that
think
was
touching
really
on that, that reminds me of, like, I remember when I was a little witchling, like going back in the early 2000s, which funnily enough, early 2000s is now considered old school. Just think about that for a second.
I
Like,
know.
I was playing music
try
that was
not
released
to.
in the turn of the century, and all these, like, the younger people at the gym, they're like, what is this song? I'm like, this was like the big song in my heyday. Like, what are you talking about? But anyway,
How do you not know what this is?
but no, I remember when you wrote, oh God, now I'm going to mix it up, because it's City Magic was one of the earlier books that you had written. And it was all about, like, I remember there was a particular chapter that you spoke about, and this really spoke to me at the time, because I was, being a young gay man, going out to the dance clubs, all that kind of stuff. It was all about getting into trance, and how, and funnily enough, it was to trance music for me.
Music.
But you're talking about with shamanic drumming, and how, they would drum to get into a trance state. But then I'd be going out to like doof clubs, and getting into this psychedelic trance, listening to these, and you literally trance out. And it's like, it's so easily done. And I think it was because it's just so aligned with my life at that point in time. I'm like, oh my God. So it's not just me going out on a bender. Like I'm actually in my own way having this spiritual experience through music, and the technicolor lights that are flashing around. It kind of elicits that altered state of consciousness as well. And you kind of go off into this own little, time just disappears in the blink of an eye. So it's just like, that's what I love about, the modern era, is that there's more than one way to get into trance. And I love how you just so eloquently put that. Sorry, I jumped in again.
Jump in as much as you like. It's all good. But it's really true. It's like that evolution, I guess, of whatever the ancient practices were, and creating them to a way. And I wonder also, like, do you feel like it is something that has that deep inner knowing in there as well, that you're saying that inherently human, that's a part of it as well, that it's kind of easy to adapt because there is that ancient part to it?
Yeah, and I think humans, regardless of the time or place, there's so many basic things to us, and we're always seeking the same thing. Think of magic all across the world as things about protection, love, money, fertility. Having success in your life, feeling like you've got some security, feeling like you're in control. And then we're also seeking the mystery, and we might not know what that mystery is, but everyone's seeking that ephemeral something. And I think, modern people don't always have the context for it. So, we go to that dance club and we're seeking something. We're having a good night, but we're also seeking and then we touch it. We touch it on some level because we're out in the dance floor and we're having that trance experience, and something wells up in us, or something surrounds us, or however we describe it. And then we're like, I want that again.
Yeah.
But we don't always have the context. You try to say that to somebody, then they're just like, oh, you're just dancing. Like, it's just a Friday night drinking. Like, what's the big deal? And you're like, no, it was so much more than that. And then, you can either get context for it, or you can seek out other teachings on it, and understand that pattern of it. But I think part of it's biological. So it's like the actual music and the lights and all that change you. And I think part of it is inherent to our heart, that we're seeking out something specific. And even if we don't know what it is, we're still seeking.
Still trying to find it. And on that, how would you kind of describe your personal path, or the path that you personally follow, I guess, now?
I would say that's changed a lot over the years. I would say, based on a lot of the work that, I'm doing, and talking about the school and things like that, a word I identify a lot with now is a temple keeper. I believe that a big part of the decline of the ancient world was the loss of the ancient temples. And I think, part of my mission has been about creating temple, but also the idea of teaching people that, like, behind me is a temple, and this idea that our altar spaces and our sacred spaces, if we don't have buildings in the civic world that holds the holy, each of us as practitioners have to kind of hold the holy first in ourselves, and then in our environment. So the idea of looking at, like, being a priest, even if I'm a priest for one in my home, in my room, in my office, I'm holding the holy. And what are the rituals that help upkeep the world? What are the rituals that help upkeep and attend the gods within me and the gods within the world? So that's been like a core part of my practice and teaching people about that. Although I think it's only been the last couple of years I've articulated that. But from like my personal development, hugely into plants. And a lot of the plant spirit work has been great. And I'm an herbalist and a flower essence person, and potions are probably the thing that opened up so much of my magic. Just some of the most profound experiences, just kind of stirring that little cauldron under the full moon and figuring out what is the herbs trying to say to me. And I'd say a lot of ancestral work, but particularly ancestral work with the mighty dead. And the idea of connecting to the enlightened ancestors has been a huge part of my path.
I was almost going to add a little comical gesture there. Like, I think almost every single topic that we've touched on there, I'm like, he's written a book for that, Like, this is the thing, like, rewinding the clock a little. Like, because I'm happy to plug all of your books, and I've done that on multiple episodes now. Like, whenever Vicky and I are like, oh, what topic do you want to do next? I'm like, okay, we do our little research before we talk about a topic, because we don't just interview people. And I'm like, I always go to your books first, because I know 99.9% of topics are covered in one of them,
There's
not
something there.
multiple. Yeah, and so I flick through your books. I'm looking at the back in the reference section. I'm like, yep, he's got it here, and I'm flicking through, taking notes, and it's only like I use everyone else supplementary, and it's like I'm shameless. I don't care.
It's fine.
I actually wanted
Dorothy
to.
Morrison told me years ago. She goes, "We write the books that we wished we had, so it's all in one place when I need it."
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, sort of what it turned out to be, you know.
I love that. And well, that's actually almost the birth of our podcast. Like we were just talking, and I said to Vicky, I'm like, we should do a podcast. She's like, what do we know about podcasting? Like, we'll learn. Let's just record it and let's just see where this goes. And in the space of like 4 months, because we started this because of lockdown, now both of us are much more in touch with our own spiritual paths, and we've built this sense of community globally. Even like we've got people from America all the way to the UK. We've even got people from obscure places. I'm waiting for the day that we get someone that's not from Earth, because it actually shows you a percentage of your listeners from each planet. And I'm like, I would spin out if we got a listener on Pluto. But anyway, bring it back to my question though. Like, this is one of the things with your, like, why I gravitated so much towards you as a witchling, is that I remember I went into Spellbox, which is a little store in Melbourne. And I was just perusing the shelves, and I have it right here. I picked up this book, which was called Sons of the Goddess. So this was the very first book that I ever picked up. And it was back in the day, like when I was extremely into Charmed on TV. It was during like it was like I was a little closet witch, but I didn't know to call myself a witch because I thought only girls could be witches back then. But when I bought this book and I read it cover to cover in like less than a day, like I was obsessed with it. But of course I had to hide it under my bed so that my very Catholic parents did not see it. But it was just something about your story that I just truly resonated with, because obviously I know that we share a very similar, I guess, because you've got a half Italian, half Polish background, is that correct?
Half Italian, and then my Polish side, Polish last name, but also part Lithuanian.
So
Lithuanian.
Having that Eastern European mix with that very Catholic side, like it's very much like my family, whilst different countries, but still a very strong upbringing. So I had to go to Catholic church, I had to attend Catholic mass, I had to do all the, communion, reconciliation, confirmation, And in my own spiritual path, I dabbled in many different things. And it wasn't until I arrived at your book that I was like, holy shit, there are other people that have experienced the same thing and they've written about it. And then then I became the addict that had to go to them and say, can you please order the next Christopher Penczak book, because I know it's come out. Can you order it for me, please? So I was that guy, and now I see them everywhere. So snaps to you. But bring it back to the actual question. Like, I'm interested to know, like, for our listeners who don't necessarily know your origin story, do you mind sharing a little bit about like where it all started for you? Because I know you've got a very highly critical scientific mind as well when it comes to the practical side of magic. And how do you feel that your personal witchcraft has evolved over that time, like from your origin to now? I know that's another very big.
We don't take small questions here. We
want the dirt. And I'm just kidding.
So I do have that background of being raised Roman Catholic, and the last 4 years was an all-boys Catholic school, which is not half as fun as it sounds to a lot of people. Like my gay friends were like, that sounds amazing. I was like, it really was not.
No.
But and coming from that, by the end of that experience, I realized, well, I believe in something, but I don't know what I believe in. So I guess I was technically agnostic. And I had a very good family friend who was my art teacher from when I was like 7 to when I was 16. She was my first boss, gave me my first high school job. And it always been a really close friend of the family. And we'd have these bizarre conversations, particularly after I graduated high school, because this was back in the era that you didn't tell people you were a witch. Like there was no witch families, there was no like festivals were not really an open thing. They were out there, but I didn't know anything about them. And it was that idea that, you didn't want to have an adult corrupting a minor, even though she was friends with my family. She was just afraid, what would the reaction be? So she slowly hinted around at things like we'd talk art, and she'd bring out Egyptian hieroglyphics, and she'd bring out Celtic knotwork. And she'd talk about all these different things, and she'd plant these weird subversive seeds. Like, I never really thought going to a Catholic school, she's like, well, history is really written by the people who won. So you can't always trust their point of view. And I was like, what? No, history is history. And so she really started getting me to question these things. And then maybe 6 months, 9 months after that, she started teaching me like imagery of tarot cards, and occult stuff without calling it occult. And then she dropped that she was a witch. And I just thought that was hilarious. Like, nobody's really a witch. That's not a real thing. This is before Charms. This is before Sabrina. This is before all those things. And this was back in the day where if you went to a bookstore and you went to the occult section, because it was definitely occult, it wasn't New Age. There was
Yeah.
maybe 10 books and it was next to like the Satanic Bible. So I was like, oh, that's
Yeah.
important, you know?
Yeah.
It was a very different world then. So I just thought it was ridiculous. And I couldn't understand why this woman who I admired so much and was such a modern woman, she was a single mom, raising 2 daughters, running her own business, had taught me so much, was really this role model. Ironically, when I was getting confirmed, I asked her to be my confirmation sponsor and she said no, and it crushed me. And it crushed her too. Like, I can't in good conscience go. Little did I know 4 years later that I'd find out she was a witch. And so, you know, when she told me all these things, I was just like, I need to understand, because you're not delusional, you're not stupid if you joined a cult, you know. And I wanted to like get her out of the cult if she joined a cult, little knowing that, you know, I'd run a cult later on. But the whole idea that a good type of cult though. And you know, as she started teaching me these things, she didn't want to. In order to understand it, she's like, you don't have the vocabulary to have this conversation. So she gave me a book, and the first book she gave me was on quantum physics. And I was like, wow, that's great. And at that time, I was very, and it was like a layman's quantum physics book, but it was, you know, the mystical side of quantum physics. And I was like, yeah, this is amazing. This is fascinating. I was about to go into chemistry full time, like as my major. I was graduating. And I thought, okay, this is great. I said, but what does this have to do with witchcraft? And she's like, okay. She goes, well, you need to read this other book. And then she gave me the Kabbalion, which I was like, well, this is really interesting, and, you know, very new thought, and you know, a kind of summation of ancient hermetics. And I was like, well, this is interesting, kind of weird, but interesting too. And then she gave me a witchcraft book. And that book was Power of the Witch by Laurie Cabot, and that was her teacher. And so I was like, oh, and then having that context, I could appreciate the witchcraft book better. And then she's like, now we can talk. And through that, she started teaching me, and she taught me how to meditate. She taught me how to read tarot cards. She hired me the first time to teach to read at a big psychic fair. She started inviting me to her coven. And that's when my mom got a little nervous. And so my mom started coming to the coven meetings. And then she thought, okay, this is cool. But this was this woman who's our friend for years. She's like, okay, it's safe. And then when my teacher ended up bringing me to Laurie Cabot and started bringing me to things in Salem, she got really nervous. And so my mother ended up taking classes with me. And by the end of the classes, she decided to give up Catholicism and become a witch.
I think that's so lovely. Like,
oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I didn't know that part.
Your mum just sounds like the most amazing woman ever. It's like a typical mum thing to do, though.
It
like,
is, though.
I think my son's doing something weird. I'm going to have to join it as well. And then just decides to like fully embrace it and go in there as well. It's funny because my mum, she's a little bit different because like, well, in Australia, we call them a little wog mums. So like little Southeastern and Southern European mums that are like, you know, they gravitate towards their sons and they have to kind of wrap us in cotton balls and all that kind of stuff. And like, you know, really protect us and whatever. And they feed us like, oh, you're too skinny, eat more, all that kind of stuff. But like my mum, she has never really used the vocabulary. Like she knows I have a podcast, Witchin and Bitchin. She knows I call myself a witch, but I think it was easier to say the word gay than it was to say the word witch. From my mum.
That was the opposite for me.
Oh,
so
really?
I came as a witch because my mom knew I was taking the classes. And actually my first witchcraft class was the first time I met an openly gay woman, a gay lesbian, and openly gay man. And I was like, wow, this like really exists. Because I was like 18, 19 at the time. And I was like, they seem happy. They seem fairly normal for witches. But, you know, I was like, and that sort of, and seeing my mom's reaction to them gave me more of the courage to be able to come out. But it still took me, I'd say I was probably a witch out publicly as a witch for 2 years before I was out as a queer man.
Wow. And I think, I forgot because you wrote that article. It was coming out of 2 closets. It was for the Fiona Horn Pop Goes the Witch book. Yeah, I remember that article, which funnily enough, when we did the episode with Fiona, I still have it bookmarked on that page because I've read that article so many times because I was struggling with that, you know, inner turmoil of which closet do I come out of? Can I be out of both, or can I be only out of one at a time, or whatever? But no, I just love that. I'm like, I feel like I just want to squeeze your mum's cheeks and just,
I know.
like, thank you for being role model mum 101. Like, you know,
that's
just so awesome. So, has your practice with her then? Do you do a lot of practice work together still, or?
Well, she was sort of the mom of the temple in many ways. She's passed on now. She passed on in 2011. But she's helped host all our original Sabbats that we did when she was in my first coven. Was my mother, my spiritual sister, and I, the 3 of us. And then the coven that we used to go to stopped doing public rituals, and they're like, you should start doing public rituals. So we started doing public rituals, and she'd sort of host the party. and I'd sort of post the ritual side of it. And that sort of evolved into our community over years. We did pretty amazing, if I do say so myself, Samhain rituals every year. There was sort of like, you had to know somebody to get in. There weren't official invites. But
Oh,
my
wow.
student group, like we're all invited. And I was like, well, if you trust somebody, you can bring them. But, and by the last year, we did it for 13 years in a row. And by the last year, we had like 70 or 80 people in our backyard. And it was, when my mom, old Italian mother, would like to cook, she cooked, so she had a spread out there for everybody. And she would love to craft magical crafts, but also like crafting. And so she would set up a room in the house where she would spend the whole year making magical potions and cords and strange, wonderful, weird things. And then as guests came in, she would bring them through the room and say, and depending on the year and how much she had and how many people were expecting, she'd say, choose 1 to 3 things and charge them in Samhain. And those are for everybody along with the whole party. And a lot of people came who would, like, it was their first time to witchcraft. It was their first time to anything. A lot of people brought spouses and husbands and wives and siblings and things like that. So it was really good. That's how I was introduced to it, was going to somebody's Samhain ritual, my first teacher's Samhain ritual. So it was really nice to kind of pass that on to people. But it eventually got too big for us. And so we ended up doing our greater community work in the temple and me teaching publicly. And my mom was both my parents are super supportive.
That's so amazing. And did you
find all the Sabbats now? It's quite funny.
Oh, that's fabulous. I love it.
Oh, look, we've joked about the idea of Vicky and I going on a bit of a, you can't really call it a road trip when we have to involve a plane. But anyway, like doing a thing where we want to go to, like, because in Australia, we just don't have the types of festivals that you have over there. Because it's a dream of mine to come to the temple. Like, I know I'm going to get there. I said to my husband, I said, even if I've gone through my 5th degree and I'm going through the whole to become a minister and all that kind of stuff, I said, I will fly there. I will move mountains to get there to do, I don't know what do you call it, to be ordained, or like the official terminology. Like, I will fly there. I'm making it my thing. It's on my bucket list. I'm coming to the temple and I'm doing my thing there. But like, even I know you guys do Temple Fest every year, and I know there's even other festivals that happen all across the US.
Lots of them.
We just don't have that out here.
No, not as many.
So it's like, I'm glad that you do them.
I went to one festival in it wasn't Sydney. I can't remember which town, what area of the country it was in, but it was like, wasn't Melbourne was the one place I wanted to go to that I didn't get to. I had an interesting, and I'll just say somewhat difficult trip to Australia. But I want to say it was the Church of All Worlds in Australia hosted the first part of it. And it was a small festival. I was surprised they flew me out because it's expensive to come. I was surprised they flew me out for such a small festival, but it was really fun.
Yeah. Well, hopefully okay, I'm going to put it out there. Thank you for making our podcast boom. So then we have a big enough following that we can bring Christopher again and we can see Melbourne. Yes. We could go to Adelaide, but it's, I'm just kidding.
I'll come to you.
I'm kidding. Adelaide is like, there's a lot of churches in Adelaide, that's about it.
There is. Oh.
But anyway.
There's a lot. I wanted to ask about, as I know that you've got a few new books coming out, as you can see from Darren's huge library behind there.
Well, that's only a third of them.
I know, that's only a little bit. I know. So I wanted to ask you about your book. I know, is it The Witch's Hut that's coming out first?
Yeah, it just came out.
It literally just came out.
The first one out today, literally.
Oh, yay!
Yeah. So it just came out. I just got my case of it in. So The Witch's Hut's sort of a weird book for me. I've taken a stab lately at doing things a little bit more artistically and a little less technical. And The Witch's Hut is sort of a parable. And it's not a fictional story, like it's not a novel for people who are expecting novels, but it's a short kind of parable, 22 chapters, with artwork that I've done in it to illustrate each one. And basically it's about a little town that has a mishap. Their barn gets struck by lightning, and there's all sorts of weirdness that happens in the town, and they blame the local witch, and they show up at her doorstep basically wanting to lynch her. And she kind of goes through a whole process of why are you here, and everything that they respond with, she sort of gives them a nugget of esoteric wisdom, and kind of addressing not so much like how to do ritual or things like that, but more about addressing life. So it's things about blame and fortune and fate, and the idea of, who has power and who doesn't have power, and how do we operate in the world, and why should we be good, and are the gods real or not. But it's just a couple pages on each topic that's sort of a parable to explain things to somebody who might not ever want to be a practitioner. So it's or if you are a practitioner, it can kind of take things deeper and kind of give it a greater context of like, why are these things in magic important to everybody, not just witches,
I think
so I'm very excited about it. It's a small little book. I'm very excited about it. So.
I was gonna say, because when I was reading the blurb, I guess is what you call it, I don't know, like the description about it. I was like, wow. So is this something how was it to write something like that wasn't necessarily purely like a non-fiction, like to add that? I mean, I know it is still has non-fiction to it.
Because if anyone has read your books will know that you are like the king of writing footnotes of where you got your information from, like,
which is
very
wonderful.
well researched. So it's like people can follow the breadcrumbs. It's not just you talking some shit, like you actually know what you're talking about.
Which is something is not always done as much now, which I think is really great, is how researched everything is. So like, how was it weaving sort of that story with fact? And
for one of my shortest books, it actually took me the most number of years to finish.
Oh wow.
So I started it actually, I was having an altercation with somebody in the greater witchcraft world, no naming names, and just kind of thinking about how we sort of victimize ourselves and each other, and how there's, even in witchcraft, there's so much othering, and we're always looking to blame somebody. And everybody thinks they're the hero in their own story, whether they have good behavior or bad behavior. And so much of it is about perspective. And I just started getting like a little, when you're talking to yourself type of thing. And some of the first lines of it kind of came out where I was just kind of like thinking, I was like, is that me? And in no way am I saying I channeled this book or it was a spirit or anything necessarily. But it was sort of like a little voice of wisdom in my head. And I just kind of wrote down some stuff. And while we were fighting, I wrote down maybe the first fourth of it. And then we sort of resolved, and I was like, okay, that was weird, and kind of just put it in a back burner. Maybe someday I'll finish it, someday I won't. And every time I had either a difficulty with somebody or a difficulty in my life where I was questioning, like, why does this happen? The little voice would kind of ping in, or I'd be meditating and I kind of hear something and I'd go down and write down. And I framed it in the context of the story.
Yeah.
So a lot of the words that I'm using in the story from The Witch of the Hut is sort of the words of wisdom that came to me while I was, questioning why do things happen the way that they do. But I don't fight with a lot of people, and for the most part, life is good. So it took a good 4 or 5 years for me to, have enough bad experience.
To be able to put it all in.
That's a good problem to have, though.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I'm very blessed. I realize that. Yeah.
I've actually noticed though that that's something I'm very, like, even just in the time that I've obviously been involved in the craft, like I've noticed that as we go on as a society, there's so many things that are pulling us back to various teachings of the craft. Like obviously now I've recently heard, because we're preparing to we're preparing to talk about the burning times, because I know that they happen in 1692, but from February through to May. So we thought we would release it in February, like an episode about the burning times and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny that post Me Too movement, I've heard the rhetoric of the burning times come up in conversation for lack of a better word, from muggles, saying that, they're saying how it's interesting how, back in the day, any outspoken women who were like fighting for women's rights or just going against the patriarchy were burned for being witches. And I'm like, how are people making this connection? Like, I thought only witches knew these stories. Like, it's just so fascinating that how even these little nuggets of wisdom, like what you're talking about now, like it's actually very much relatable to not just witches, but to the greater world. Like there's so much that can be learnt from our path.
Yeah.
And passed on to others.
And the patterns repeat themselves over and over again. Like the burning times and Me Too. There's also like looking at the whole craziness of QAnon and the conspiracy theories and stuff. And it goes all the way back, at least from our lifetimes, to the 80s, the satanic panic, and a lot of the same, accusations that turned out not to be true then, or the accusations that are happening now, and it still involves the occult. And it's very interesting to just see how patterns repeat, and having to kind of debunk the same lies and debunk the same stories over and over again.
Yeah. So another thing I was interested in finding out, so like with the direction that you've taken your writing, because I know that obviously this is kind of like a bit of a new direction for you. Is that something that you felt, is it due to the way that the society is evolving that kind of pulled you in that direction? Or is it because like, I mean, you've got a book on just about every topic. So it's like, well, I haven't written like a semi-fictional novel yet. So let's go down that road. Like, what was the inspiration for going down this?
Yeah, it wasn't a conscious intention. I think literally it was that initial conflict that kind of sparked the creativity of it. But I think my writing has changed, like switching publishers and moving from more mainstream, larger publishers, which is wonderful in many ways because they do a lot of the things for you. But at the same time, even if they're wonderful to you, you still don't have creative control. So the more artistic it becomes to know, like, I don't have to convince anybody what I think the cover should be on it. I can have a conversation with somebody, but it's not necessarily a fight. Or I know, like, no matter how popular you are in your contract, it always gives the publisher the right to refuse you. You know, so the publisher ultimately decides what's going to make the final cut and what's the cover going to be, and even what the title is going to be. And I've been very fortunate. Like, I've not really had a lot of things changed for me, but there's often a process of having to convince them that you're right. And I find that exhausting, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So as time has gone on, I've taken more of an artistic direction. Like, I've done a lot of the really well-researched, really detail-oriented books. I'm sure I have others of them in me to do. But I've been doing a lot more of personal gnosis and really integrating all the things that I've learned. A lot of my Copper Cauldron books are much more about my path or my experience of it. Not that they all aren't, but it's much more unique to our community in the Temple of Witchcraft. It's much more mystical. Like, someone told me recently they read The Mighty Dead, and they're like, it's almost like you had a mystical experience. I was like, yeah, and if you're practicing this, you should be having those too. Like, that's part of our practice, you know. Like, but I think if you're really living it, it's not just to unearth and research things, but you're going to get transmissions of experiences. And then you can relate those experiences to other people. And I think 50, 100, 200 years from now, I would like people to be talking about the new stuff we're created. The research stuff is wonderful, but that's just kind of re-researching and repackaging things that have already happened. You know, how are we going to take it further? So I think my stuff with the Mighty Dead, I think my stuff with the Plant Spirit Familiar, I think some of the temple keeping stuff I'm working on that'll be coming out next is very much from that personal gnosis with cultural context and footnotes and history and all that. Really, you know, what have I synthesized to be my experience to share with you?
It's so beautiful because, like, I know that I even noticed the transition. Like obviously you were with Llewellyn for a long time. I know there was a few books in there from Wiser, but then with Copper Cauldron, I know that was really something that really birthed from your own writing. Is it something you're wanting to share a little bit about for our listeners?
Sure,
About the birth of Copper Cauldron?
The first Copper Cauldron book was The Three Rays of Witchcraft. And it was probably my fastest book I've ever written. I kind of received it in the image that's on the cover was sort of in a meditation. And it just sort of, I know this is a word that's overused a lot, but like downloaded in some way, you know? And over 9 days, I finished the first draft of it. And that's pretty huge for me for a book, you know? And it's very original material and very strange stuff. And that became sort of a guiding vision for the work we were doing in forming our community at the time that eventually became our nonprofit Temple of Witchcraft. And my original idea was to kind of create an arm of the temple that was like a religious publisher and have the corporate proceeds of that really support the nonprofit and make things easier for that. But in America, we have all sorts of wonderful rules around nonprofits and dealing with the IRS and everything. And so if I had no success previous to this, and was helping found a publishing company under a nonprofit and doing a church and all of that, that would have been fine. But the fact that I had success in how they phrased it was something like I had success in my previous genre. And having the publisher be publishing that genre, they were afraid that it was some type of tax escape for me. So I ended up starting Copper Cauldron. So my partner Steve, Adam, and I started the temple and founded the temple together, and then we founded Copper Cauldron. The original vision was for the two of them to be owned together. So the church would own the publishing company, but the IRS said no to that. And I didn't really, out of all the things, it's hard enough to do a witchcraft temple. So I decided to pick my battles and decide not to pick that battle. And, you know,
just separate the two.
We make a donation every year to the temple, so it's all good.
Like I feel like, even though we would you want to touch about your like Vicky wanted to touch about the other books that you're upcoming, but just because we're on the topic of the temple, just it seems like a natural segue. So like, as I know that's, as I said, it's something that's on my list that I have to go there at some point, because like for me to have a Temple of Witchcraft is just like epic on so many levels. Like obviously the vision, it was birthed quite naturally and organically, which I love. What is the future vision of the temple going to look like? Like, where is it going to go, do you think? what's your grand vision of where you would really love to see the temple growing to? Like, will you eventually have different locations, or?
Yeah, I would love that. I have a plan that I'm unattached to, but I have a plan that's a multi-generational plan, and I think I will hand that over to the people who come after me, and they can decide yes, no, modify it, whatever it may be. Our immediate goal, long-term goal, but our immediate goal is to convert part of the property now to the larger community center, which will cost roughly around $1 million according to our budgeters. So having to raise that, will probably be my mission in my lifetime, and I'm okay with that. The kind of grander vision of it is I would like to have different places in different parts of the country and then eventually the world. I would like it to be more accessible than it was back in the day when I started. Like a big part of it for me was all the people. I think I started in the early 90s, and I think all the places that I went to, the witch houses is what we used to call them. And they'd be like the Covenstead would be in some elder's, basement or attic or whatever. And you'd meet, and it was very romantic in many ways, much smaller than things are now, but very romantic. But when that person died, or when their kids took over, or they wanted to retire someplace else, poof, it disappeared. And that little hub of community disappeared. And for something to be so land-based, and sacred to the earth, I can only think of one place, and because I know the person, but nothing happens there publicly anymore. I can't think of any place from my first 10 years of training that I still have circles at, except for Salem, Mass, Gallows Hill, which is not my favorite place to have rituals, but I get why they do it for Samhain. So really wanting something that could build over time, realizing traveling to sacred sites and doing those tours, and realizing how difficult it can sometimes be as witches getting permission to use different places, because they hear, and although it's sacred to the ancient pagans, and thinking like, I get it, but also how ridiculous it is that like one of the places sacred to us that, we're going to get much more than, mainstream tourists, we're not allowed to do ritual in, or we're not allowed to kind of come into. So how do we create spaces that we can control? So I would like to have centers that are like what we're building here in New Hampshire and other places. I would like to see us to do a museum and museum library type of thing, someplace maybe in an urban environment, because we're sort of in the suburbs right now. I would like to have us have a much larger chunk of land as a nature preserve somewhere, and to have kind of like a retreat house, and to actually own our festival space, because right now we rent our festival space because the space here is not, it's all forested, so we can't have people camping and things. And then my eventual like 2 long-term goals is to have some type of, I don't know if hospital would be the right word, but I'm going to say healing temple, where we can start infusing some of our ideals with medicine. Like there's Catholic hospitals, and there's things like that. But I like to see the paying attention to the energetic side, the emotional side. A lot of the things I feel don't happen in hospitals these days. I would like to see us bring some of that, maybe bringing meditation to like drug recovery and things like that. We've tried to reach out and extend that. There's a big opioid crisis in America, in the New England area here. And if you say you're a witchcraft organization, though, people don't want to have anything to do with you. So
that's right.
I get it, but at the same time, like, can we create a place where we can not lose our magic and not lose the depth of what we do, but can we also reach out to the community and help in different ways? And then my ultimate goal is I would love to see some type of town or village that is not based on the witchcraft trials and the persecution, but can hold seasonal festivals and can kind of be a tourist area where people can come and meet and be educated and have those experiences, but have it be really based in love and not the tragedy of the burning times or the tragedies of persecution. But that might be 5 generations from now. I've decided I'll put that plan out.
Put that one out there. I love that
though. Who knows? Depending on what paradigm you believe in, like you may be back in 5 generations time in a different lifetime, and experiencing it all over again as if it's brand new. Like
we say that a lot. I say, I'm creating the temple because when I come back and I want to learn witchcraft again, I would like something to hold it, so I don't have to build something over again. So we've said that quite often.
I love it because it's like it literally is like, I don't know. I jokingly said it when I received my acceptance offer to join the mystery school. I jokingly told my friends, because like telling them, oh yeah, I've got an apprenticeship offering for the witchcraft one at the Temple of Witchcraft mystery school. They'd just be like, what? I'm like, hey guys, I'm going to Hogwarts, and they're like, oh my god, that's so cool. That's kind of the way I told everybody that I got into Hogwarts, and that I was waiting on my acceptance letter from Hagrid, from Hedwig.
Hedwig.
I'm waiting on Hedwig to fly in and just throw some envelopes at me, and they're like, what? And I'm like, doesn't matter. But
Because
anyway,
it's such a beautiful thing though to be able to, like you said, like if you do coming back, like I don't want to have to go around and try to create all those different things. How wonderful would it be to have all of that space there, that it's just
And I even think of that for the next generation. Like
yeah.
me observing witchcraft, every generation's had
Mm,
to remake it. And I
yeah.
think there's a certain blessing to that, but I think there's also a certain problem because like you always have to kind of start from the ground up. Like if you feel
Yeah.
called to do this as a vocation, there's absolutely nothing that's going to support you.
Yeah.
You know, so it'd be nice to have, you know, a spot where like I'd like to think the next generation here won't have to worry about housing if they're going to run this whole thing because there'll be a house here.
Yeah.
You know, or they won't have to worry about raising the money to create a space or even cutting the trails and building the stone circle and all that. That'll be done for them and they can do better things and bigger
Yeah.
things from that because they'll have a good foundation. But I did
So
know a
awesome.
coven years ago that would bury their coven tools when someone died with the idea that the person would come back and find the coven and would reclaim the tools, which obviously it's not happened in my lifetime, but I find that really, like, I was like, what a test
That's
of faith.
awesome.
You think that's going to happen?
Yeah, I'm like,
I hope I come back and I see that and we visit again.
Yeah.
or alternatively, you're gonna end up in a like an archaeological dig and go into a museum somewhere. It's like, oh, we found these tools. Like, so Vicky, do you want to bring it back to the books? 'Cause
Yes.
I've gone off on another tangent.
That's
so.
good, but it's a great tangent. I love it. It was so good, and it flowed nicely. So that's all good. So I know there's another book coming out as well.
Yes.
I believe The Lighting of Candles. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Sure. That's the second in my practical magic series.
Yep.
And it's the idea of each book is going to take a different aspect of spell casting. So the first one was the casting of spells.
Yep.
And
Yep.
it was all about written and verbal magic. And now this one's all about candles. So it's everything from the history of candles and magic and how they've been used, going back to oil lamps and things like that, to how to work candles in a Western magic tradition, from simple tapers and birthday candles and jar pull-out candles to more complex candle mandalas and grids, and how to dress the candles and how to carve the candles and all that. But the deepest aspect it sort of ends with is the idea of witches being light bearers, and the idea of holding the sacred. And just even something as simple as holding a candle on your altar daily, or having, like I have my little oil lamp on the back, you can maybe see it flickering a little bit.
Yeah.
Idea that it's, you know, holding the sacred, and in holding that sacred, again, going back to temple keeping, just this simple act of lighting a candle every day with intention and purpose to bring more light into the world is one of the ways we participate as being priestesses and priests of the mysteries.
That's so beautiful. I love that, because that's one of the biggest things I always find, like that the candle is one of those things for me. When I sit down at my altar, that's one of my daily things I do. I light my candle, and there's just something about it that just instantly creates that space.
And I think it transcends all religions, all spiritual paths. Like the candle is like so central to so many different practices around the world.
Yeah.
It's always about lighting candles. And it's like, there's just something, even though you could switch on a light switch, like I think there's something almost romantic about doing things in candlelight. Like, because whenever I do any form of official ritual work, my neighbors laughed at me because they drove past our house, and our estate lost power one night. But being a witch, like I have so many candles. So I literally in the front room of our house, which is the window that faces the street, I have a big candelabra that has big 3 pillar candles on it. And then I had a couple of other ones around the shelves and stuff. And I literally just lit every single candle in that room. And my neighbors drove past because they went to get dinner. And they texted me and said, how have you got power, but the rest of the suburb doesn't? I'm like, they're candles. And they're like, what the hell? And they took a photo of my house, and it literally looks like I'm this one house in this whole suburb that has like light shining out of its windows. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. So it's literally just like, they're like, I'm surprised your house didn't burn down. There's that many candles on. I'm like, it was literally only like 5 candles, but
yeah, see, that's when they want to know the witch, when the power goes off.
Yeah, we always have candles. And even for, like, I call it Witchmas, but for Christmas presents, like I was given so many candles from so many people. I'm like, I think people must think that I have a candle addiction, because it's either chocolate or candles. That's the 2 presents I get every year, or wine. That's it. They're the 3 gifts I always get.
Life, right?
Yeah,
I was about to say, I'm like,
perfect.
Tick, tick, tick in my book. I'm
like, I want your friends.
That's it.
So I did want to visit, because obviously we've got the 20th anniversary of it's the Temple of Witchcraft series that we've got the 20th anniversary coming up. So
wow.
I'm interested to know, because obviously as I said, I was that guy that had to buy every book in the series. Mind you, full transparency, and I've said this on a couple of episodes, like I literally read through the first 3, and then when I hit higher witchcraft, I was like, at the time, my brain wasn't ready for it. So I've tried to pick it up so many times, I just keep hitting this block, and I was like, I didn't know what it was. It's only through COVID when I was unpacking a lot of like personal development stuff, I realized that I wasn't actually living the teachings of the first 3. So I just kept hitting this mental block, and it doesn't matter. I can read the words. I know what the words mean, but it just wasn't sinking in.
Yeah.
So like that's another reason why I thought, you know what? I've been toying with this idea, and you and I have had conversations about this on Messenger for years about like, I'm interested in doing the like mystery school. And it's only like, I thought, you know what? It's now or never. I'm getting on in age. Like
yeah, that's right.
I'm 36. I'm turning 37 this
anniversary.
year. Like, and I'm like, and these books have been around for a long time. Like, I need to just do this. So that's why I just bit the bullet and applied. But I'm interested to know, with the 20th anniversary, is it going to just be a re-release of the existing books, or is it going to be a rewrite or extra inserts? Like, is there any inside scoop that we get?
Sure, I can tell you. Yeah, it's not a rewrite of the book. So people ask that a lot. That's pretty unusual for a publisher to release the same book as rewritten.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of additional material to it. So pretty much, so that book came out it's 19 years this year, but they're putting each one out every 6 months. So to kind of get the 20-year spot, we're starting the first one on year 19. And because they all kind of came out over the span of a few years.
Yeah.
But I've been teaching that course since 1998. The book came out in 2002. And then from 2002 to now 2021, I've been teaching the course. Now it's pretty regimented in the Temple school, but some years I would teach it 3 or 4 times a year, and sometimes it'd be a little bit more compressed. So rather than doing it once a month, we would do 12 weeks or 13 weeks. So I've taught the course a lot, and I've gained a lot of notes. I have other teachers that are certified in the Temple to do it, so they've given me feedback of things that have worked for their students. I've just kept all this kind of information. Some of it's part of the class you'll be taking. So we have like daily wisdom lectures, and we have a book of shadows that's just for students and things like that. But I've taken little snippets of it, and I'm reweaving it all into the Temple series. So almost every lesson has additional information. And then the hope is, there was always a plan to put out a 7th book, and then I had left Llewellyn. And so I'm putting all the material together, which I think at that time, everything happens for a reason. I think at that time, if I tried to write the 7th book, it wouldn't have been what I want it to be. So now that I have all this hindsight, when I go back to do the 7th book, it's going to be kind of a snapshot into the community and the tradition, where the books themselves now are a lot more about the techniques. There's all sorts of kind of cultural things that are specific to the tradition if you practice in the school and you practice in the community. So I want to give sort of a glimpse of that in the 7th book, which is called The Key to the Temple of Witchcraft. But I also am not going to give it all away, because it's a difference between reading a book and being an initiate of something. So I like to be open, but at the same time also kind of have something special for the people who go through the process.
See, the little I guess you'd say OCD person in me is now thinking, oh shit, now I have to rebuy all the books again. Otherwise I'm going to have like major FOMO. Like I'm going to be like, I'm missing all the new excerpts, like inserts or whatever. Like there's so many things that I'm not going to have now. Like I have to have it all. Like
it's about Inner Temple got maybe about 20,000 extra words. And we got Roy Cabot forward, and I wrote a new forward, so they're pretty significant. So people say, "Oh, is this just the same old book?" And is it worth it to buy it? I would say, well, it's a different experience. So,
but in all honesty, even if it was the same old book, it's such a freaking good series. Like it goes to I love the structure, and this is why I like, as much as there's so many different mystery schools out there, like, and new ones popping up all the time. But this is why, like, when I've spoken to a few of my friends in the witch community, they're like, "Oh, so you're going to do Temple of Witchcraft?" I said, "Yeah." They're like, what's your driver for that? I said, well, for me, it's just such a logical step. I started with your books. I know most of the books inside out and back to front, cover to cover. Like everything just seems to align so perfectly. So I'm like, of course I'm going to go with the Temple. But now knowing that I have to buy a whole nother set, like, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I just tell my husband, I'm like, it's okay though. This is different. This is called like needed reading for my coursework.
That's right. I was going to say.
I'm just going to say it's a mandatory requirement.
This is required reading, so it's fine. It's all good. It'll be fine.
We'll have another 6 books that all match next to each other.
That's exactly it.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because when you said that you wanted to release another book and you're like, and I'm not with Llewellyn anymore, my OCD will be like,
I knew where you were going. Is it
Like,
going to be the same?
is it going to be the same size? Like, are they going to line up nicely? Is it going to be the same color, same font? Like, because
That particular book will come out from Llewellyn, so yeah, no worries.
Oh,
yeah, because I was like, it doesn't matter. Like, it honestly doesn't matter. But like, I'm just one of those people. Like, I hate it when someone's writing a series, especially novels. They do this a lot. I always wait because the first print always comes out in that really large print, and then they go down to the paperback size, and it's like, so even though I really want the next book and I want to buy it straight away, I have been known to buying it immediately, reading it, and then passing it on to a friend so that when the trade paperback comes out, I buy it again so that they all match on the shelf. Because I'm like, otherwise I'm like, oh, I've got this one random big book I can't deal.
I have Anne Rice series of books where they change the publisher or they change the print run of it, so they match, and then even the soft covers no longer match. So
yeah,
I hear you. I feel you.
That's so funny. So like I know this is the kind of, I'm going just riffing off what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So with the temple, like, because I know the organization of the temple, but for those that don't know, I guess because I know that there's obviously you have different ministries that all handle different affairs, and it's very, very structured. This is why I just love it, because it's like any other organization. You go in there, there's like a full, it's a prospectus. I don't even know what the technical jargon is, but like there's a proper like it's very structured, and it's very like, it's not just like, oh yeah, let's start a temple, woohoo, yeah, let's have witchy things. Like, what's the in a nutshell version of how, because I know that for you it probably was very important to have a very structured, documented, legitimate organization, obviously, for lack of a better thing, for the IRS, as well as for just because I know you like to compartmentalize and structure things. But how would you describe the temple to those that don't know much about it?
Well, the kind of structures that many of us trained in were the traditional coven view.
Yeah.
You'd study in a coven, you'd raise up through the ranks, you'd get to the third degree, and then you'd hive off and create your own coven. And I think that can work for a lot of people. And when it's held well, it's held really well. And when it's not held well, it's really not held well. And a lot of people, I think, who don't hold it well are really great witches and can really offer a lot to the community, but they're not meant to lead a coven. So it's sort of a one-track thing where this is what you have to do, or you stay stagnant, or you stop practicing in a group. And so I knew lots of people who had great skills, and teaching and doing public ceremony and things like that was not their skills. Some were really great administrators, some were really passionate about the environment, some really wanted to work exclusively with women, some really wanted to work in prisons, but there was nothing to support them in doing all that work. So as part of we're very astrologically based in our correspondences and our magic and everything. And so we have the core of the school. And then like the school, there's the mystery school, it's the first 4 levels. And then the 5th level is the seminary and teaches the high priest, high priestess level. And even after that, there's some hoops you have to go through to be ordained, to be a teacher and do all that. And we sort of let people tell us if they get to that level, well, what do you want your ministry to be? And we approve you based on your ministry. So if you're like, I want to do weddings and funerals, that's an easier approval process. If you're like, I want to teach the whole mystery school, then that's a harder approval process, but we just want to make sure you're prepared. And part of the training as you're going through the mystery school, if you want, it's not required, but if you want, are all these opportunities to serve in the community through these 12 ministries. So each zodiac sign has a ministry. And there's an outer aspect of service to it. There's a community aspect of service, and there's a mystical aspect of service. So like Aries is about a lot of protection. And a lot of the people in Aries are deeply involved in martial arts and kind of the physical fitness aspect of mysticism and magic, but they also do a lot of the protection spells and magic for protecting the temple, protecting people in the temple, and kind of working with that warrior spirit. And how do we bring that warrior spirit in? Where I'm the head of the Sagittarius ministry, and you don't have to be the sun sign. I'm a sun sign Taurus. So people are like, well, I'm not a Sagittarius. How can I be that? It doesn't matter. But Sagittarius for you is the teacher. So it's all about Sagittarius ministry runs the schools and runs the staff and kind of keeps those standards up. We've got one that's about Pisces, deals with our public ritual and does the Sabbats and the moons and all that. Capricorn ministry does a lot of our prison ministry stuff. So even though I run Sagittarius, I volunteered in Capricorn. So I'd go into the prisons and run rituals for the people who identify as pagan or witchcraft in there. And it was really, I did it for about 8 years. I've taken a step back from it now, but it was a really challenging and beautiful and challenging experience. I'm really glad I did it. I'm really glad I'm taking a break from it now. And I might go back to it at some point, but so it was really kind of creating space and support and logistics and mentorship You know, if you wanted to do any of these things, like now somebody who's serving in the prison ministry, they have me to draw upon. And, you know, we've created a little network of other organizations that do prison ministry. So you don't have to go in alone and be scared. You know, you have that support. Or, you know, if you want to do funeral work, we have a whole ministry that focuses on funeral work and grief counseling and that type of work. And knowing when you're over your head, because we're not counselors, you know, so you can offer pastoral care, but also to know, oh, the line is you need to talk to a therapist right now, or here's some resources for you, or here's another member that might be able to help you. So it's really kind of continuing that community chain where you're not in it completely alone. You know, I've had some really great mentors, but you know, it's nice to have a structure where I don't have to do it all. And when I was just teaching and I didn't have the temple, everybody came to me with all the questions. I'm not an expert at everything, you know, so I want people to have support in areas that are helpful for them. So, you know, when someone has a death, when one of the students has a death, I can be empathetic, but at the same time, I'd be like, you should talk to our Scorpio ministry because they're really about the rituals of death and can help you. Or, you know, I'm really about art and witchcraft. And although I love art too, that's not my main focus. So, you know, here's a whole ministry in Leo ministry that's about art and creative expression and entertainment and music. Do you want to get involved in that? And that's a great way to serve and find your own ministry in it without having to, you know, reinvent it all.
I think that's just so beautiful because it's like especially as witches, like having a personal practice is great and all. And I'm not dissing anyone that only is a solitary witch with personal practice and that's all they do is about their spiritual path. But like there are some witches out there, myself included, who always want more. Like we want to influence the community. We want to like support the community. We want to get out there and get our hands in the dirt and really help other people. Because at the end of the day, like it's like you make, especially as you age, we go from this thing of all about me to all about everyone else. And it's so nice to have an organization such as the Temple that you literally can be pointed in any one of these different directions. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you can kind of volunteer in one of the ministries to get experience with it. And then you could always go and volunteer with another ministry and like really using on your, I guess, daytime skills or like other areas of expertise that you have outside of your craft, which is so amazing because then you're literally fusing. It's not this is my day job and then this is my night job and then this is my witchcraft job. Like you literally, it's almost like fusing them all together, which is so beautiful. Like this is why I'm like, I know it's not even a question that I'm going.
Even running something like our festival, you know, it's nice to take people who like their day job do logistics because I don't do logistics. You know, so if someone knows how to run a big event and they want to help us run our big event, it's going to go a lot more smoothly because they know budgets and they know contracts and they know how to book things and chart it, you know. So it's really important to realize that not everybody's service is always going to be the esoteric healing. They can still have their own personal practice. They can still participate in group ritual and do all those wonderful things, but maybe they're not meant to lead a coven. So, you know, how can you best serve? And it keeps on growing. I knew when I first started teaching, you know, the amount of covens that were taking people, there wasn't that many covens. So there's so many people want to learn. They don't necessarily want to join a coven or the coven doesn't necessarily want them to join. So, you know, we encourage people to practice in groups that are equal. You know, so if a group of students want to get together as a circle and practice, that's wonderful. But we save the structural aspect of it through the classes. So that way someone you're friends with in a coven isn't also telling you, nope, you can't do that, or yes, you can do that, or you know, all the friendship dynamics don't get mixed up in the educational dynamics. We keep that very academic and clear. And here's the criteria, and you either fulfill the criteria or you don't. And, you know, so we try to make it less personal, and we have teams. So like if I'm taking something personal or someone's rubbing me the wrong way, it's not just my decision.
That's very true. I come from a coven background, and that's why I wanted to ask you as well about that. How was it to move into that role of a teacher as well? And like, how did that progress and change your own kind of practice a little bit? Because it is a sacred kind of duty as well.
Yeah, I didn't set out to be a teacher in any way.
Yeah.
You know, I was in college at the time and I was studying, I did a 180 from studying chemistry to going into music, you know, and I was not, I think at that time I was still closeted. So, you know, I was not a particularly happy person all the time. And witchcraft really brought out my best qualities. And a lot of my friends were just like, well, what are you doing? What's different? And I'm like, oh yeah, you know, meditation. And I try to change the subject. And they, you know, finally they're like, no, really, what's going on with you? And so the few people that I shared that I was doing witchcraft with wanted to know more. And so I'd send them to Salem and I'd send them to different people and all that. And then there was a point where Lori Cabot wasn't teaching anymore. My first mentor wasn't taking on public students. And they're like, well, you can teach us. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. But we had a book club, and then the book club transformed into like a once a month study group. And then I realized, well, I was the one who had the education mostly. And so they'd be like, well, what did you learn from Lori? And I started cobbling my first class together from stuff I learned from my first teacher and from Lori. And it just kind of snowballed. And when I eventually lost my job in the music industry, I had a very profound magical experience around that, where the goddess came to me and said, you need to teach more. And I was like, all right, I'll teach more. And then 3 days later, I lost my job. And I was like, all right, I guess
That's
I'm
the
teaching
big
more.
push.
Yeah, it was the really big push. And I didn't want to. So, I'm a sun sign Taurus. So I want to have stability and structure and money coming in and food on the table.
Yeah.
And I temped for about 2 weeks, and each job was worse than the next. And the very last place I was supposed to temp at, I got a call from the temp agency the morning before I went in that it burned down to the ground. And I was like, all right, well, I'm done temping.
So I'm done with that.
I put up a flyer at the this is before the days of internet. I put up a flyer at the supermarket and the library for meditation classes, witchcraft classes, and I had a full class within a week. And I was like, all right, this is what we're doing, So it was really divine guidance to do it, because I didn't really want to be. My mother always said I was going to be an English teacher.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be a teacher. I didn't really want to lead a coven. I just wanted to practice and play music. But here we are.
And so, like, with that journey, like, because obviously you've touched on the fact that because obviously know that you were involved with Laurie Cabot, but who were some of the other authors or, I guess, thought leaders in the community that you followed, like, from your progression from being a little witchling up to today?
Laurie Cabot was a huge one for me starting out, because she had the science and the art and all that. It's been, as my teacher, a huge influence. Dorian Valente was absolutely huge as well. Just the level of sheer poetry and majesty in the work that she did, and really bringing such an authentic voice to a lot of the traditional stuff. And the other really big one who I got to have a wonderful friendship while he was here on this earth was Raven Grimassi. The first book that I read after I was done my training with Laurie Cabot was Ways of the Strega. And my mother and I were so excited to find something Italian, because everything at that point was Celtic.
Yeah.
And got really deeply involved in some of his books. And then when I became a Llewellyn author, we were all at a big book expo together and had a dinner, and I was sitting across from him and his wife Stephanie, and that started our friendship. And I've been really good friends with them for over the years, and Raven passed on the last few years ago, but I'm still friends with Stephanie. They moved out here, and so that's been a pretty amazing thrill for that. A lot of the kind of classic authors that I started with were going back to Gerald Gardner and Alexander's stuff, going back to even some of the more modern figures like Amber Kay was a huge influence for me at that time. It took me a bit to kind of go back to some of the other classics, so by the time I was probably teaching and writing, I was getting more into the folkloric stuff and a lot of the old Kappelbahn books, like, Nigel Jackson and Nigel Pearson. And Michael Howard and figures like that, those have been huge. And then these days I've been in a big Egyptian phase, studying all things Egyptian, all things Hermetic, and both new and old. And I think everybody goes through their grimoire phase for a while, and I find grimoire fascinating, but I'm like, how practical is this? Do I really have the blood of a screech owl? Nope, I don't. What am I
That's so awesome.
That's so cool.
I was actually just thinking about, and now I lost my train of thought. I actually had a question there and it just disappeared. It'll come back to me. No, I've gone dead on air. How am I speechless? How do I not have something to say?
I was about to say, that's not right.
The question was there, and then it just poof, and it disappeared. I'm like, oh, okay. Apparently, it wasn't an important thing to say, but that's okay. No, that's what I was going to say. Okay, so for those, obviously, I know a little bit more insight into the temple than most people will. But like, would you say, because is the temple based on Wicca, or is it something else? Because that I know that here in Australia, there's this big, I wouldn't say divide, but there is almost a little bit of, especially on the internet. There's the Wiccans and the non-Wiccans, or there's Wicca with a capital W versus small w. Like, there's all of this stuff going on here in Australia, and I kind of just, like, I'm not pinning this on you to have all the answers. But,
but I think a lot of times witchcraft is often just associated automatically with Wicca.
With Wicca, yeah. So how would you define the temple?
I think if you've been, even pre-temple, just to get my ideas or my feelings on, when you're in this long enough, you realize that every 10 years, everything changes. And in that time when everything changes, nobody who's very strongly opinionated about something wants to admit that it was ever something before that. You know, in their mind, it's like what I'm saying is the way it always has been, and it's never changed. And once you see that flip a couple times, it's interesting. And I won't say I stay out of it, but I feel like people are very attached to their opinions, and I don't want to say I don't care, but however you identify is okay.
Yeah.
My first exposure to it was my first trip to England.
Mhm.
And so, you know, coming from America, we definitely had a Scott Cunningham vision of Wicca.
Yeah.
And my first teachers, like Laurie Cabot is very definitively, she's a witch. She identifies with the tradition that comes from Kent, that she has modernized into the Cabot tradition, but her roots she calls the Kent tradition of witchcraft, and her teachers were the witches of Kent. And but there's not a lot of history there. Like a lot of people are like, oh, is this real? Is this, you know, how can you prove it? But like so many stories from our founders,
I was about to say,
how can you prove it? You know, but I've had really deep conversations with her, and I think she studied with somebody who was real. I think she studied with somebody who was an occultist, just because the weird little flips of when she studied as a young girl, like, because she started studying when she was like 13, and just weird things to notice, like we didn't have colored candles at that time. You know, so for people who are like, oh, she's making it up, like there's just too many weird details. Actually, I had, before he passed on, I had a pretty good correspondence with Michael Howard. And I sent like, these are all the folkloric things that Laurie learned from her teacher. Do you know anything about these people from Kent? You know, you knew everybody. And, you know, what do you think? Like, I think this is an authentic tradition. He goes, I just don't know what we would have called it, you know? And so when I first went to England, coming from an American background of Scott Cunningham and solitary Wicca and everything, first group I spoke for was super old guard, you know, and so Wicca was Gardnerian, maybe Alexandrian, maybe, you know, but anything else was not. And so my own vocabulary in talking, I would use it pretty loosely, and I had people correct me, and I'm like, well, you know, you'll have to forgive me, but for the purposes of the speech in my work, you know, I'm using Wicca and witchcraft somewhat interchangeably. And like, how dare you? Although I went back to England the next year and spoke for an entirely different group, and they were so in line with what I was saying, and it wasn't an issue to anybody. So I knew it wasn't England in general, it was just that particular group. And so for me, you know, part of the update for the Inner Temple stuff and all the Temple series is touching upon these things, because I think a lot of people read it today and they're just like, oh, he didn't say this or he didn't mention that, you know, and that wasn't a thing in 2002. You know, so it's kind of updating it. So as the Temple, I go back to what my first teacher said. You know, when I first came out as a witch, and when people I know were practicing, you know, you'd say, well, what are you into? And, you know, it'd be like earth religions. And then if somebody didn't look at you kind of crazy about that, you're like, well, paganism. And then if that was okay, you'd be like Wicca. And then if they're okay with Wicca, you're like, okay, I'm a witch. You know, and now that I have the Temple of Witchcraft, you know, it's hard. I have to start with the word witch, and that's the word I prefer. But I think recently a lot of people have been trying to shun Wicca as not as good or not as valid or not as real. But if it wasn't for Jill Gardner, none of us would be here. And I think whatever your deal is, you got to honor that. I think you got to honor Jill Gardner. You got to honor Alex Sanders, whether you like them or not, whether you agree with what you're practicing. We're all here because of Jill Gardner, Alex Sanders, Sybil Leek, you know, and even less well known, but Robert Cochran, got to throw that in there too, you know, and even going back to figures like Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey and Dion Fortune and all that. I think it's really good to embrace our whole history. So sometimes when people say I'm not Wiccan, then they're just going to throw out everything of Gardner, they're going to throw out everything of Sanders, but
that's the basis of everything. Like,
it is. I mean, and they're the reason we know about what it is that we're doing. They brought it all out into the light. Like you said, love or hate them. That's what created. That's what started it.
And so some people will say, you know, is the Temple Wiccan? And I was like, well, how do you use that as a definition? Because we use the word witch, but for me, witch embraces aspects of Wicca. I'll always tell people, we're not British traditional initiatory Wicca. We're not traditional like Cunningham, early Raymond Buckland solitary Wicca, but we don't shy away from the word. We talk of Wicca as the root of, you know, the word witchcraft, and that's why, you know, it's been used and everything. Legally for our IRS, they recognize Wicca, you know, as much as witchcraft. If we put Wicca and witchcraft and paganism and all the keywords, we don't have to go back and ever change it, you know, in the future, however we want to embrace it. So the government was able to be like, yep, you're a religion, you know, we have other Wiccans. And, you know, we teach the Wiccan Read, but going back to the whole idea of the Wiccan Read is good advice. You know, it's not a law, it's not something immutable, but I think if I'm teaching kind of, I always make the assumption, whether it's true or not, that anybody who's coming in, this could be their first thing. You know, and I want to teach everything ethically and responsibly to everybody. And I think in general, is the Wiccan Read, if the read is a good idea to follow and it's good advice, I think it's good advice. I think generally when, I'm not harming somebody else, someone's not harming me, we're okay. It doesn't
Mm.
mean that you have to take abuse, which some people have equated it to
Yeah.
be. It doesn't mean you have to, or that you're not able to do any type of destructive magic. Sometimes you need to break things down to build it up. Sometimes when I talk about that, people will be like, oh, do you curse? And I'm like, oh, in my mind, I don't curse. But then I'll tell them something I did, which in my mind is justice. And they're like, oh, that sounds like a curse. I'm like, only if you're guilty. So I think it depends on the perspective. I try not to do magic vindictively. I think that sullies for me what it is. I understand people who do, and I try not to have judgment for them, because who do I know? Wherever they are, that's up to them. But I know for me, I don't get good results when I'm vindictive in anything, whether it be magic or anything else. So I don't define the temple as Wiccan. We tend to use Temple of Witchcraft as witchcraft. But we also embrace our roots, we embrace our ancestors, we honor all of that, we teach it. And I'll talk about the Descent of the Goddess, the Wiccan Rede, the Poem of Nine Woods. I think those are all key documents that root us. And I think a lot of traditions now trying to be, as I say, with great respect and love, dark, scary motherfuckers. There's a lot of dark, scary motherfuckers who want to throw all of that out. And I think they lose a lot of wisdom and they lose a lot of culture.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is like I've noticed, like when even in my own progression, like over the years, like people always ask me, oh, how do I identify? And I would say, look, it was just easier to say I practice Wicca than it was to explain I practice, because I coined this term after reading your Mystic Foundation. I practice eclectic mysticism, because that's how that was like the catch-all phrase that kind of fit what I was doing. Like it's mysticism because I read all the different religions and dogmas and spiritual paths and and I eclectic because I bring it all in, and mysticism because I read them with a different lens. And I loved your analogy. I'm pretty sure it's from that book, the analogy of, and I explain this to everyone when I have hardcore Christians or Islamic people, because I teach a lot of different like fitness classes and stuff, and I have people from all different faiths and backgrounds and stuff come up to me, and I sometimes wear stuff like this out in public, and they see me. And they're like, or they see me on Facebook posting stuff about witchcraft, or now Witchin and Bitchin. Like,
I was going to say, you can't really get much more out there.
Exactly. And then when they ask me, I use your analogy of referring to, like, I use the terms interchangeable: source, spirit, God, goddess, Buddha, Allah, like all of that, like as universe. Yeah, all of them are synonyms to me. And I use your analogy of the big multifaceted diamond, and how when each religion holds their view so close to them, that they get a distorted view of all the others. But it's the whole act of stepping back and appreciating the whole diamond in its entirety. That's like true mysticism, because you're not being so close and intimate to your view, or holding on to this attachment to your view that I'm right, you're wrong. And as soon as I explain that to people, like, oh, this sounds beautiful. I'm like, all paths are beautiful. You just have to not be so like ego driven that you're wrong and I'm right, and let's just go out on this crusade. Like we can all respect each other's view, and actually I've held on to that, and I tell people that all the time. They're like, oh my god, that's really amazing, how did you come up with that? I'm like, oh, I didn't. I'm like, that's Christopher Penczak. Read the Mystic Foundation, he says it far better than I do. There's a diagram of this big multifaceted diamond, like but I've held on to that because that's what has stuck with me over all these years. And I still, I mean, even we had Kyle Gray, obviously Angel Whisperer, all about the angel realm. And he was talking to us, he goes, I'm not really eclectic, I'm more a dabbler. And then Vicky was like reading me for filth. She was saying, oh, so you're going to call yourself a dabbler now because Kyle said dabbler. I'm like, no, I'm still eclectic, thank you. I still like my eclectic mysticism.
That's it.
Like, that's how I identify. So, but no, I love that because it's exactly.
I've even been using the idea of syncretic. The idea now we're kind of weaving together all the different pieces into a new whole. So I feel like that's a big part of my work now, is kind of taking those pieces and deepening the culture and the temple, and deepening, just the practices of witchcraft. Because I think sometimes we're like magpies and we gain little pieces, which is wonderful. But then what's the next step after that?
We swoop in people during swooping season. I don't know if you experience it in Australia, but here we have magpies that are like viciously swooping at people. But anyway, that was a side little joke. But no, I do love that. Being able to
my profound Australia experience was the flying foxes. When I saw the flying foxes, going, what the hell is that?
Oh, so no one told you about drop bears?
I love
them. Have you ever heard of a drop bear?
No.
It's otherwise known as a koala. But the whole concept of a drop bear is this myth that we've created to scare stupid tourists. So basically it's a koala, but when people look at it, I think it's a cute, cuddly little bear. But the thing with koalas, now I don't know if this is fact. So anyone listening, fact check me if you want. This is what I've heard. What I've heard is that koalas, because they only eat eucalyptus leaves from the gum trees, but there's no actual substance to eucalyptus oil. Like you can't live off that. And then the leaf itself, like there's no nutritional value for them, but that's what they've learned to survive off. And I've heard that the eucalyptus oil and the large consumption is it makes them like docile because they're a little bit almost high on the oils. And so there's two theories. Is it, are they high, therefore cute and cuddly, and that's why you can get your photo taken with them, and that's why they sit them separate when they haven't fed in a while. They sit them separate and say don't touch them because they're now coming off their hit. Or are they innate? So are they innately vicious and we make them docile by giving them eucalyptus, or are they innately fine but they're only aggressive because they're coming off their fix? Like, which is it? And so we created this mythos that when, no offense, but like a lot of tourists that come from North America, they tend to believe a lot of the stuff we spin here in Australia, and we love it because we can tell them that we ride kangaroos to school and that we have these vicious drop bears that drop out of the trees and attack you and all that. And it's
really it's probably just high and it's fallen out of the tree.
They're just climbed too high and you know. So it's like, yeah, we have this concept of drop bears, but they don't really exist.
Yeah, I didn't know that one. I'm glad I didn't know that one when I was in Australia.
I love to just fuck with everyone from North America because it's so much fun. Like, and everyone's like, oh, you have such dangerous spiders and such dangerous snakes and dangerous vicious things. I'm like, we do, but I've seen like these top 10 deadliest spiders. I've seen maybe 2 of them once each. Like I've seen one redback and one whitetail in my entire life of 36 years around the sun. So like, and the dangerous snakes, I think again, I've seen one, and that was at a zoo. Like, but we like you to think,
seen a few.
We like you to think that we're like rampant with all these vicious animals that are going to kill you.
It's not as bad.
That was kind of the warning when I wanted to go hiking on my own, one of the festivals. They're like, well, be careful. And I was like, well, what? You know, and I heard many of those things. So yeah.
I would be more scared of being like attacked by a moose in New England than I would about being attacked by a snake in Australia.
Okay.
Is it moose?
So yeah.
Is it moose that is known in New England? I'm pretty sure. I know in Canada definitely, but isn't it moose or?
They are not in the area we're at. You have to get pretty far north in New England. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's wild moose around, but I'm in the suburbs, so
yeah.
I don't know.
Because like because I've got friends in Ontario, and they said like if you hit a moose, like they are so tall that if you hit it, it's hitting your windscreen. Like their legs are so big, like they're massive creatures. So I'd be more scared of one of them running out in front of my car than getting bitten by a snake. Because I mean, I've said this as well in previous episodes. I live in the catch and release zone for all of the snakes in Victoria. They release them in my area. So we here have a very, what's the word? Vicky? I'm looking for the word. Like our relationship with snakes is a very...
Oh yeah, we're a bit more, what do you call it? Bit blasé, not blasé about it, but it's they're all over.
They're there. You respect them. They respect you. You leave them alone. Like if I notice
everything's happy.
We posted on Facebook, warn everyone on this street, I've got a snake. Just letting you know. So then when people are walking past the area, I mean, they'll walk across the road to give them their space. But if they have to approach, we just know in our area to stomp our feet really hard.
They don't like
because
it.
Then they don't like it and they scurry away, and then you can keep going on your merry way. Like it's mostly about people having
knowledge,
no understanding or knowledge of how to be around. They freak out and they, try to hit it with a stick, and then it's just going to come for you. Like,
that's
anyways, that's a massive tangent.
That was a big
I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop before this turns into a 3-hour podcast.
When you make it to the temple, we'll take you to find the deer and the moose here. So, deer, moose, bear, those are biggies.
It's not when. No, actually, no. You did say when, not if.
Yeah, I said when, not if.
So that's okay. I will make it to the temple. It's gonna happen.
Yeah, that's
like
right.
my husband already knows when we eventually make it to New England, I want to be there around Halloween because I want to experience Salem, and I want to go to the temple. Like it's just a non-negotiable. That's on. I'm pretty sure if there was an option, I would have written it in my vows, but I didn't.
I love it.
But anyways, no, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on our show today. It's like I feel like I'm just catching up with an old friend. I don't feel like it's really an interview as such, but this has been great. So I really look forward to it. If you could like if anyone wants to get in touch with you, obviously they can find you on social media. Also, they can follow the temple. You're on Instagram, you're on Facebook. They've got your
All the
websites as
details.
well. Yeah, everything is there. So if you want to order any of his works, like they're available at all major retailers, even here in Australia. Otherwise, you can even order directly from you. I know that you can order most of the works from you. I think I've done that a few times and even said, "Can you sign this one for me, please?" And you have, like, but yeah, so I will be putting in my order for all of the temple books all over again because
Yes,
I just have
because
to.
you know you will.
Yes.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This has been really fun.
It's good. I'm so glad. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing day.
Have a great day. Bye.